Hey, everybody, welcome to the briefing room. Happy Friday. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Great to have you with us. We have a packed show today with an exclusive interview with the Director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement on some breaking news out of that agency on plans to deport thousands of families in this country. More on that coming up shortly. We'll also get over to the Supreme Court on a big case that came down today and also talk a good bit about the 2020 Race for 2020 weekend down in South Carolina. There's a lot happening down there, but we start today with the big development out of Iran. The president says he was cocked and loaded, ready to strike Iran, and he called it all off just minutes, really, before he was set to pull the trigger. Here's what he said in an interview about that decision just a short time ago.
But we had something ready to go subject to my approval. And they came in, and they came in about a half an hour before. They said, "Sir, we're about ready to go." I said, I want a better
planes
definition.
In the air? Were planes in the air?
We're about ready to go.
Yeah?
No, but they would have been pretty soon. And things would have happened to a point where you wouldn't turn back or couldn't turn back. So they came and they said, "Sir, we're ready to go. We'd like a decision." I said, "I want to know something before you go. How many people will be killed? In this case, Iranians." Mm-hmm. I said, "How many people are going to be killed?" "Sir, I'd like to get back to you on that." Great people, these generals. They said, came back, said, "Sir, approximately 150. And I thought about it for a second, and I said, you know what? They shot down an unmanned drone, plane, whatever you want to call it. And here we are sitting with 150 dead people. That would have taken place probably within a half an hour after I said, go ahead.
Yeah.
And I didn't like it. I didn't think it was proportionate.
A simply remarkable turn of events there, and raises the question of what's next. We bring in now James Longman, our foreign correspondent, who is joining us from the region. Also, Suzanne Maloney is an Iran expert at the Brookings Institution here in Washington. She is with us as well. James, I want to start with you. How is this apparent aborted mission being received over there? How is this being interpreted?
Well, I think one word, relief. I don't think anybody in this region wanted things to escalate. I think it's a question of careful what you wish for, because there have been allies, US allies in the region that have long been pushing the United States for action on Iran, coming down hard on Iran. They are Saudi Arabia and Israel, to put it bluntly. Now, the Israelis, they're probably still quite keen on the Americans taking some kind of military action, at least. You can't blame the Israelis. The rhetoric out of Iran has been pretty intense for some years now. But the Saudis, I think, have been pushing Donald Trump and his administration into punishing Iran. And I'm not sure they thought it was going to go as far as it might have done just last night. I think for them to witness an escalation, and for other countries here, the United Arab Emirates, where I am now, I think everyone realizes what could happen. Because for Iran to react to a strike of some kind, it wouldn't be, the reaction wouldn't come from Iran. It would come from one of the many proxies that they supply, that they fund in the region. Places like Yemen, where the Houthi rebels who they support are currently locked in battle with the Saudi coalition there. Places like the Palestinian territories with Islamic Jihad and Hamas, who the Iranians fund. Places like Iraq, who've seen an uptick in attacks on US interests there, US oil interests. Syria, where the fight against ISIS is still boiling, even as far afield as Afghanistan. So there are so many battlefields across the Middle East and further where Iran could strike US interests. And so I think people in this part of the world now tonight are thankful that nothing happened, worrying perhaps that it still could, because I don't think the United States have taken military action off the table. I think surprised perhaps even at Donald Trump's decision to row back, but wondering certainly what's going to happen next.
Yeah, for sure, James. And it was clear from our reporting that some of those concerns about proxy attacks were raised with the president and perhaps got through to him, as did those casualty numbers. I want to bring in Suzanne into the conversation. Suzanne, a lot of people kind of surprised that the president seemed to be just finding out minutes before the attack was to occur about the potential for 150 casualties, in his words. How does that strike you? And we hear from the administration about concerns about those proxy attacks that James was talking about. You study Iran. How might Iran have responded to something that killed so many people?
Thanks so much. I think it's quite interesting that the president has highlighted the casualty figures.
He seems to be reveling in the drama around this prospective attack and his own role in first ordering it and then calling it off. But it's interesting that the Iranians, for their side, have been signaling that they also exhibited some restraint, that when they shot down the drone, they actually had sights on an American spy plane that was in fact manned, and they opted not to attack that plane. And so I think what we've seen from both sides is an effort to signal that they are prepared to step back from anything that will involve direct casualties on either side.
And the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who was at the White House last night, a number of Democrats also raising concern about those casualties and the potential you talked about, Suzanne. Here was the House Speaker a short time ago when she learned last night, after leaving the White House, that this had all been called off.
Oh, absolutely. No, I think I don't know how imminent the strike was. You hear different things, but a strike of that amount of collateral damage would be very provocative. Maybe be very clear. The Democrats in the meeting, House and Senate Democrats, were very clear that Congress must act. It must have the authority of Congress before we initiate military hostilities into Iran. De-escalate, de-escalate, de-escalate. Take a deep breath and de-escalate.
Speaker was a bit hard to hear there, but she was repeating de-escalate, de-escalate, de-escalate. James, I'll bring you back into this because that seems to be a message from a lot of American allies, particularly in Europe. And we're already seeing the ripple effects across the region where you are, across Europe. Even though nothing actually happened last night, airlines are rerouting their flight paths over the Persian Gulf.
Yeah, that's right, Devin. We've actually heard now that the closest flight to where this airstrike, the drone was brought down, was just 45 miles away. It was a Qatar Airlines flight going from Doha to Bangkok. So a lot of airlines, from Singapore Airlines, Emirates, Etihad, British Airways, some of the biggest airlines in the world, of course, including the United States Aviation Authority, have all put in bans on flying over Iranian airspace. You've got to remember that drone is about the size of an airliner, but it can fly twice as high, about 60,000 feet. So I think it probably took a lot of people by surprise that the Iranians had the capacity to bring a jet down like that. So airlines being taking a lot of precautions because, you know, Doha, massive hub here, Dubai, huge hub for airlines, Istanbul not so far away. Iran is just, you know, to put it simply, rather a large country, and it sits in a place where a lot of air traffic flows. Qantas, for example, its flight from London to Sydney, that has had to be rerouted. So they're all taking precautions, as you would imagine that they should. And we'll see if it looks likely that further military activity is not going to resume. Then I think some of those suspensions that we've seen or rerouting of certain flights, I think they'll probably cease.
Yeah, James, and as you know, the danger very real. Just a few years ago, of course, Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 shot down by mistake over the skies of Ukraine, which was just a devastating tragedy. No one wants to see that repeated here. Suzanne, the president has signaled repeatedly he wants to avoid any conflict by talking to Iran. What do you think the odds are that both sides actually come to the table?
I think it's difficult, but it's not impossible. The Iranian supreme leader has always opposed talks with the United States, and he's even more opposed today than he's ever been. He's convinced that this is a trap, that the United States has put pressure on Iran to weaken it, and that through negotiations, that's the ultimate goal, to divorce Iran, to divest Iran of its defensive capabilities. And so he's very much opposed, but there is a constituency, I think, on both sides for some kind of a process of de-escalation. And the only way to do that durably is via direct diplomacy. Every American president since 1979, since the Iranian Revolution, has in fact engaged in direct diplomacy with Iran to better and worse effect. And I think that eventually there's really no way out of the predicament that either the Iranians are in or that the Trump administration finds itself in today, unless and until there is a process of negotiation between them.
Oh, well, certainly something you're going to be watching very closely. Suzanne Maloney with the Brookings Institution. Thanks so much for joining us today, Suzanne. Our thanks again to James Longman, who's over in the region covering this story. Now to some breaking news on immigration. ABC News has learned that the nation's top law enforcement agency is preparing to round up and deport thousands of undocumented immigrant families who have outstanding deportation orders from judges. In fact, here at ABC News Live, we spoke a short time ago with the head of ICE, Mark Morgan, who says that the rule of law is at stake in all this. He says that the agency is now focusing on these families, though the president's threat to deport millions of undocumented immigrants isn't quite true.
So look, the president has been very clear on this from the start. This is about maintaining the integrity of the system and enforcing the rule of law. ICE has been doing this. This is their job. We do this every day, all day. I think the president was just making clear his commitment and our commitment to do just that.
So to be clear, this was not the announcement of some new operation or a new plan. It was simply a restating of what you're doing right now?
That's correct. Now, there has been one demographic that's been a challenge with respect to having the political will to do what we need to do, and that deals with families.
Why focus on families? Shouldn't the top priority be, with such limited resources, on convicted criminals?
So that's a great question. And our priorities, that's exactly right. And our priorities will remain the same. It's always going to be to go after the criminal aliens that have committed heinous crimes against American citizens. Right now, of the individuals that ICE arrests in the interior, 90% of those are criminals. Our priorities are going to remain the same. But priorities does not mean all other demographics are exempt. It just means we prioritize. Again, we're not exempting, and we shouldn't. Right now, one of the greatest pull factors for families to come here is they know once they arrive in the United States, they remain here untouched. We have to change that message.
Is this about instilling fear? Is this more than anything a PR push? I mean, you don't have the capacity to deport 1 million people tomorrow. It's just simply a fact. The resources aren't there. So is this really just about sending a clear message by reminding people that families are in the crosshairs too?
Well, first of all, Devin, let me make sure I take exception to your use of fear. This is not about fear. No one is instilling fear in anyone. This is about the rule of law and maintaining integrity of the system. We have people, including families, that have received an immense amount of due process, have received final orders from a judge. We have sent letters to some of these families, a few thousand, asking them to come into ICE and say, hey, we'll work with you. We'll give you a few weeks to get your affairs in order, and then we'll help you go back to your home country. This is about the rule of law.
What do you say to local law enforcement officials that we hear from in some major cities around the country who say that the rhetoric, the threats, if not fear, just the announcement that these people need to comply is actually serving to drive them further into the shadows and making their jobs harder? Local law enforcement, you must admit, really rely on those open channels of communication.
So again, Devin, I take exception to your use of fear and threats. How is enforcing the rule of law a fear or threat? What I'm trying to explain to people is I'm trying to enforce the law. Federal immigration law, if you're here illegally, there should be consequences.
You have a unique perspective, Director Morgan. You served under President Obama as the Border Patrol chief for some time, sort of a rare breed in this administration who has bridged both presidencies. President Trump recently tapped you to head ICE. Why has the situation at the border reached the point that it has? Why has it worsened over the past 3.5 years or so?
Because Congress has failed to do what they need to do to protect the American people. It's very simple. If they adjust the Florida Settlement Agreement and TVPRA, which prevents us from reuniting kids with their families, and it maintains that we have to release adults, if they would fix that, this crisis would end. But they refuse to do so. That's why these individuals are coming. And then once they arrive here, they know that they stay and they're untouched. We have to change the entire parameters of that. We have to enforce the rule of law and send consequences. If you come here, you receive an order to be removed, The law must be enforced.
When the president tapped you for the job, he said he wanted the agency to go in a tougher direction, his word. And I hear you loud and clear on rule of law being a top priority, enforcement of laws on the books. Safe to say that there will be more deportations on your watch than there already are?
So there's a lot of factors that go into that, and I'm not worried about the numbers. What I'm worried about, and I know I keep repeating myself because it's important, it's about maintaining the integrity of the system and ensuring that the rule of law is being enforced. That's what I'm concerned about. I'm not concerned about the numbers.
I'm
concerned that we are enforcing that law against all demographics.
So there's been no pressure from the White House on you to increase those numbers, no dissatisfaction with the number of current number of deportations.
So I'm not going to talk about the conversations I have with the White House, but I'm comfortable saying that my mission is clear: to enforce the immigration law, uphold the rule of law, and ensure and maintain the integrity of the system.
And just one other question I have for you, sir, is on the facilities. You alluded to it with this aid package that Congress has provided. Not only is your staff maxed out here in these operations, but the facilities are. These detention centers are packed to the gills. Congress isn't allowing funds to expand them. How do you up your game, up your operation in enforcing these laws without that added capacity? What do you do in the near term? It doesn't look like Congress is going to give you more on that front.
That's correct, and that's the priorities we deal with every single day. And right now, so there's two different areas. So it's what Border Patrol, their facilities are full, and ours as well. And so we're constantly working with Border Patrol to try to relieve the burden that they have, that they're overcrowded. Their capacity is 4,000, and they fluctuate anywhere between 15 to 19,000. We were funded for 45,000 beds, and right now we're fluctuating between 53 to 54,000 in our beds. It's a challenge on every single day. We're continuing to look from within. If this supplemental isn't passed, we're actually going to have to reprogram funds within DHS. That means other components like FEMA, TSA, and the Coast Guard are going to be negatively impacted so that we can address this border crisis and continue to protect the American people. That's why the passage of this supplemental is so important.
You confident that the Trump administration will stem the tide, stem the flow of these migrant families flowing north?
I'm absolutely committed to absolutely understanding that this administration is 100% trying to do the right thing for the right reasons. Again, the rule of law and maintaining integrity in this system.
Thanks again to the director. As you saw there at the end, he wouldn't say he has confidence that this problem will be turned around. But I want to bring in now our Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo. He joins us live via Skype from Houston for his reaction to this. Also, Warren Binford, a lawyer and a child and family advocate out in Oregon at Willamette Universities. Thank you both for joining us. Chief Acevedo, want to get your reaction to this breaking news from ICE that they plan to target immigrant families. What's your take on that, and what sort of impact will that have in a place like Houston?
Well, you know, we're a city and a nation of immigrants, and as the community knows, our greatest force multiplier is the community itself. And when you have a city like ours with 600,000 immigrants, and you have political statements being made that we're going to go round up 1 million, 2 million, millions of family members, it stokes fear and panic in our community. And the last thing we need is to evoke that kind of fear where people go further into the shadows, further into the darkness, and they fail to cooperate with law enforcement at the local level. Look, I get that there's a rule of law. I get that nobody gets an absolute pass, but life's about, in a world of limited resources, it's truly about priorities. And our priority and the priority of the federal government should be to go after people that are clear and present danger. And that's gang members and felons and people that are committing violent crimes, that not necessarily families that, but for their immigration status, are not bothering anybody here in this community.
And Warren Binford, pick up where the chief left off there. What sort of impact does just this announcement have, the president's tweet that mass deportations are coming? How is that felt in immigrant communities where so many of these families are mixed status families, where some say the kids are U.S. citizens but the parents are not?
Yeah, what we're saying is that more and more families go underground, and there are fewer reports of crimes against the children or crimes against the family because they're afraid of the federal government coming after them, and that places children at risk. The parents are less likely to go to the doctor, they're less likely to go to the police, to law enforcement, the social services, when there's a crisis in the family. And so what happens is these types of policies and announcements directly places children at risk.
And Chief, have you had any outreach at all with the White House or with the Trump administration on this? You oversee law enforcement in one of America's major cities. It's a red state. The president has been down there. Is anyone listening to your take on this?
Well, we work really close with our federal partners, including ICE and HSI and everyone else. And the Major City Chiefs Association have actually called for a meeting. That's the 69 largest police departments in the country with our colleagues at the at DHS, and we'll be meeting here soon. And what we hope to do is come up with a comprehensive plan on how we're going to address immigration. Our immigration policy, our immigration system, it's broken. It's clearly broken. Everyone knows it. And what we don't need rhetoric. We need comprehensive immigration reform. We need our federal partners to focus on people that are a danger to our society. And most certainly, we need to not forget our Judeo-Christian values and not talk about immigrants or announce policies that we're going to go round up millions of people, because ultimately, if our number one priority is truly the safety of the American people, we rely on those 11 million folks to cooperate with law enforcement, to come forward with law enforcement. I can tell you, in our city, we've worked diligently to try to build up that trust, and we rely on that trust to solve violent crime. And that's a win for everyone in this country when we can do that.
Yeah, and you say that trust is now at risk with policies and announcements like these. Warren Binford, last thought to you, and a question really about the conditions in some of these facilities that are run both by ICE and Border Patrol and HHS. So many stories coming out about the conditions in there. Just today, a really stunning headline out of El Paso. A group of lawyers interviewed 60 children in facilities there. It caught our eye. 3 little girls said they were trying to take care of a 2-year-old boy who had wet his pants, didn't have a diaper. Really stunning, very sad, troubling conditions. What do you make of these stories, and how do you make a difference in the work that you're doing?
Well, I was part of that team that was in El Paso, Texas, at the Clint Border Facility and Border Patrol facility. And frankly, I've never seen anything like it. They are warehousing, literally warehousing hundreds of children. There were over 350 children there when we arrived on Monday. And these are not just teenagers, but infants, toddlers, preschoolers, school-age children. When we arrived on Monday, we were shocked to see that there were over 100 young children in these facilities. The children, many of them report that they are sleeping on the concrete floor. They are not being fed adequately. They're not being provided with medical care. The children were visibly ill. They were coughing. They had mucus running down their face. Their clothes were dirty. They were not being given showers. They were not being given access to soap, except for when they showered. Some of the children had not had showers in 3 weeks. Some of them had not been given showers until the day or two before we arrived, and said that before that they had never once been given a shower. Most of these children were separated from family members when they came across the border, including parents and siblings. We also had contact information given to us by the children for most of their family. They had family here in the United States that are looking for these children and are ready to keep them safe. It's critical that we understand that when we put these children in large congregate care facilities, such as this administration is running, it's costing the American taxpayers $775 a day for children who have family here in the United States, who love them and can take care of them. And instead, we're warehousing infants and toddlers and preschoolers and leaving them to sleep on cold concrete floors. This has got to end. If you want to know why children are dying in these border facilities, we now know why.
Yeah, the conditions are simply stunning, and we do know that several federal courts have also ordered the administration to improve conditions there. Thank you so much for shining a spotlight on that. Warren Binford, a lawyer at Willamette University in Oregon, and really appreciate the perspective as well from Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo. Appreciate your time, both of you. Thanks so much. Moving on now to the race for 2020, and the Democratic candidates are descending on the South this weekend. They're all headed to South Carolina, all with the exception of maybe maybe one or two, that is. There's the world-famous fish fry in South Carolina, hosted by Congressman Jim Clyburn. He was a legend in the state. There's also taking place this weekend the first ever forum on abortion rights in Columbia, put on by Planned Parenthood. Our political director, Rick Klein, is here for a little bit more on this. We're also joined by two of our political reporters on the ground in South Carolina. Candace Smith joins us, and also Avery Harper, who is there. Let's start with you, Candace. You're attending the fish fry, and you have been at this fish fry before. Give us a sense of what's in store and how important it is down there.
So South Carolina, as we all know, is the very first southern state that gets to vote in the primary. So it is a huge deal. 60% of South Carolina's Democratic constituency is black. So voters here are really going to have to come and play and advocate for this vote. We have 21 presidential candidates who are coming here today. Just in a few hours, there's going to be massive amounts of people, candidates coming to really get to make their case to voters. There's some really great numbers here. There's going to be 4,400 pounds of fish, 6,400 slices of bread that are going to be here at this fish fry. So it's a really exciting time.
And you will be there to take it all in, and I know doing some shooting for Nightline as well. Candace Smith is our terrific producer for Nightline. Thanks so much, Candace. I know you got to run. Rick, what kind of fish do they serve there? You've been to that. I've never been to the fish fry.
I believe it's catfish, and I wouldn't vouch for them being all that good or all that famous, but it is famous
But
politically.
it's a critical gathering, and as we alluded to at the top, most of the candidates, 21 candidates or so, will be there. One big one isn't going to be.
Yeah, Mayor Pete Buttigieg is not making the trip. And the reason that he's not going is actually fascinating in and of itself. We've been talking so much about the politics of race with Joe Biden in the spotlight the last couple of days. The reason that Mayor Pete is not going is because there was a police-involved shooting with racial overtones in his hometown of South Bend, Indiana. And he's going to have to spend some time there involved in some marches and demonstrations and quelling what could be a political firestorm. A candidate that has made explicit his need to reach out to African-American voters won't be there for the biggest opportunity he would have in the South.
It seems like it would make things a little more challenging for him. He's one of those candidates who has actually called out at some of these events, hey, if you know someone that doesn't look like you, please have them join my campaign, which is something we haven't seen before. Let's bring in Avery Harper on this conversation as well. She's in South Carolina, where the candidates are making a first stop at a Planned Parenthood forum. Avery, tell us what that's all about, and I'm kind of surprised to know why Planned Parenthood picked South Carolina. That's a pretty conservative state for this.
Yeah, well, what will happen is that each of the candidates, and this will happen on Saturday morning, each of the candidates will get on stage. They'll have 15 minutes to talk about their voting records on abortion care, any policy proposals that they have, and they'll be asked about their commitment to expanding abortion rights and reproductive rights. They say they picked South Carolina. This is the first time that Planned Parenthood is hosting this kind of event here because of the restrictive abortion legislation that has been that could become law here. South Carolina's State House passed a so-called heartbeat bill, and that means that after 6 weeks, a woman would not be able to receive an abortion, and that's before many women even know that they're pregnant. So there's lots of tension in the state over that. We know that they are going to be having protesters outside. The national group Students for Life will be outside, joined by some University of South Carolina students to make their voices heard on the issue. We know that event will be sort of a counter to this forum. They're expected to have speakers of their own there as well.
It's going to be fascinating to see that unfold, along with the fish fry. Avery Harper, a weekend in South Carolina on the trail. Thanks so much for that reporting. Appreciate you. Turning now to the Supreme Court, a significant decision today in a case that involves jury bias and in criminal trials in this country. The Supreme Court reaffirmed a decades-old tradition today that jury selection needs to be free from what they call racial bias and the use of peremptory challenges, that is, ruling out potential jurors because of the color of their skin. It's a big win for an inmate on death row in Mississippi. His name is Curtis Flowers. He's been there for 22 years, and remarkably, you see a picture of him there, he's been tried 6 times for the same crime, 4 murders. Each of the 5 times that he was tried at the beginning of this case were thrown out for prosecutorial misconduct or racial bias on those juries. The 6th time, where there was 1 black member of the jury, he was convicted. Significant case. I want to bring in Samara Freemark. She's a reporter with American Public Media, joins us now by Skype. She's been covering this case, embedded in Mississippi, was here with us back in March when this case was argued. Samara, thanks so much for coming in. Give us your sense of of what this means now for this man, Curtis Flowers, who has maintained his innocence all along, and now could face potentially a 7th unprecedented trial?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So yeah, I think a lot of people hear that the Supreme Court has thrown out a conviction and they think that means the person gets to go free. But that's not what happens. Instead, Curtis is kind of back at square one. He remains under indictment. He'll probably be moved to pretrial detention, and his lawyers will start gearing up for a potential trial 7.
Well, we see a picture here of the prosecutor in question, Doug Evans. We called his office. He didn't have a comment. Do you have any reporting yet, Samara, of whether they do, in fact, plan to try him yet again?
We did. Our team did connect with Doug Evans today. He would not comment specifically on what his plans are. He did say he still believes Curtis Flowers is guilty. And I will say, this is a man who's tried Curtis Flowers 6 times. I don't really know what would be different about a 7th.
Yeah, and big picture, Samara, help our audience understand, folks who haven't been following this case as closely. This is a remarkable case. It's a great story. You can, and in fact, we'll put in a plug for your podcast, In the Dark, which is a fascinating listen documenting the many turns of this case. But it really highlights an issue that is pervasive in our criminal justice system, and that is one of racial bias that can seep into juries.
Right. So the case at hand before the Supreme Court had to do specifically with this question of, was the prosecutor, Doug Evans, striking Black potential jurors off the jury because of their race? And that's called a Batson violation. And what the court found in today's ruling was, yes, in fact, that was what was happening, that at least one juror, Carolyn Wright, was being struck because she was Black, which is unconstitutional. Now, as you said, this is not something that only Doug Evans does. This is a pervasive problem throughout the criminal justice system. There's supposed to be laws and policies that prevent it, and yet we see over and over again this happening with prosecutors across the country.
That's certainly something that we will continue to follow. Samara Freemark with American Public Media and In the Dark podcast. Thanks so much, Samara, for coming on Friday and sticking around here late in the show. Appreciate you very much. Finally today, to a bit of a mystery unfolding out in the Pacific Northwest. It caught our eye today. It involves the Oregon State Senate. All 11 Oregon state senators, believe it or not, have gone into hiding. State troopers have been dispatched by the governor to round them up, assuming they can be found. This is to prevent the Senate from having a quorum there. For what is going on in Oregon, let's bring in Joe Douglas from our affiliate KATU. He's been kind enough to stick around late in the day today. Joe, thank you so much for joining us. So what is this really all about, and where did these senators go? Any idea?
Well, I don't know where the senators are. I talked with one of them just now. He said he is near a body of water, but that's about all he would tell me. This is all about a bill, a cap-and-trade bill aimed at fighting climate change. It turned into a big fiasco, or a big deal this week, with a lot of log trucks filling the area around the Capitol here in Salem, which resulted in a lot more media attention around this cap-and-trade bill, which is a really big, complicated bill. Republicans oppose it, saying that it's going to result in job losses and problems with the economy. Supporters of the bill say those concerns are overblown, and that studies show elsewhere where similar measures were put in place, those things didn't happen, like in California and Canada, for example. But now these lawmakers, this is a really wild situation, face a $500 a day fine for unexcused absences. And today, State Senator Tim Knopp of Bend said Republicans are planning to sue over that. They say, he says that there is no legal ground to issue a fine in this case, and so there's a legal battle brewing here as well. Oregon State Police troopers are out there. They say, they want to try to talk these folks into coming in. They don't want to, resort to really extreme measures. Knopp, the senator, said that he talked with the superintendent of Oregon State Police, who tried to get him to come back, and he politely declined. So it is a very odd situation, although the situation of lawmakers boycotting a body here, or a legislative body here, it's not the first time. It's happened multiple times before, including back in 2001 when Oregon's own Governor Kate Brown was the Senate minority leader at the time, a Democrat, and in the House, Democrats were not showing up, and she vocally came out in support of them and supported what they were doing. I'm trying to get answers from Governor Brown about that today.
Wow, this is just an incredible story, Joe. It also harkens back to that similar case out of Wisconsin when those state legislators ran away as well and had to be tracked down by troopers. No, you'll stay on the case. Really appreciate you bringing this to us on a Friday afternoon. Joe Douglas with KATU out in Salem, Oregon. Thanks to Joe for that. And thank you for joining us here in the briefing room on this Friday, a packed show. You can find the latest on all the stories we talked about today, including our interview with the ICE director at abcnews.com and on the ABC News app. We're here every day, 3:30 Eastern Time in the briefing room. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Have a great weekend.